Good morning, guten morgen, bonjour, buongiorno, dzień dobry, buenos dias, dobre otra. Wherever you may be in the world or whatever time it may be, thank you so much for watching this video today. This is the weekend update into Memorial Day, so we do not have trading on Monday. But we do want to go over the markets into the week ahead to see what's going on. Starting with SPY, as always, we'll go over the daily versus the weekly chart. And we'll go through these pretty quick because we have quite a few to go through. One thing that I want to do here really quickly, just refresh my screen. And let's get to it. So on the daily chart here, we've got a rounding top. And a lot of people would maybe consider this something that's possibly bearish into the future, which it could be. We never really know what's going to happen. But what I wanted to mention here is the fact that this rounding top is actually already broken up to the upside on the Qs. So the fact that, this is kind of forming, we just had this price kind of respecting this big block of volume here, will this be the next one to go? We'll look at QQQ in a second to kind of show you guys what that looks like. But if we look at the weekly chart, which you always should, really be looking at multiple time frames. Looking at one time frame allows you to become biased. It allows you to not see the whole picture or the perspective. So looking at this weekly candle, you'll see that we did break through this really crucial fib level here. And if we look at the Qs next, you'll see that this 0.786 literally has already been broken through on the Q. So is this the next zone above for SPY around 312? Who knows? We'll just have to see. But if we do look back from a previous chart a couple weeks ago, you can see that anytime this MACD has crossed when the histogram has gone negative, you will see that we have had quite a move. So if I, show that here, the MACD crossed right around here. We had continuation up. We then had the MACD cross here, continuation up, and then we just had the MACD cross here as well. That's no longer red. This is more of a green zone because we broke out, and we'll just have to see what happens into next week. But it is always important to look at both of these time frames. The daily, we're nearing this block of volume here shown by the volume by price, and on the weekly, we are breaking out of that crucial fib level that I'm sure many people are watching. On the Qs, you can see something a little differently here. We do have quite a strong ascending wedge here, very tight, getting really close to the apex of this wedge. And it's, the question is, are we just going to completely break right through it? Are we going to break down? We will just have to see. I mean, the real answer is nobody knows. We'll play it as it is. And this is the way that I personally like to use the alert system here. Is I'll just create an alert on both areas, and I want to know whenever the price breaks through this resistance, and I want to know when the 10-minute candle breaks through it, and we'll do rising wedge, 15 days have passed, create alert, and now I don't need to watch QQQ into Monday. I just have the alert set if we break out, and then I'll also create an alert down here in case we break down. So then I don't have to conform to my biases before the move's already, it hasn't even been made yet. So here, rising wedge support, I'll just do S. And I put 15 days on the last one, but if you look here, the apex is really getting pretty close. So within 5 days, I'm thinking one of these two lines is likely going to break. So now into Monday, I've got my two alerts set on this ascending wedge, and whichever way price breaks, I'll know that's kind of what to look at into the week ahead or whenever that does happen. On the weekly chart, notice I mentioned here we already are way past this 0.786 level here, and we're actually nearing all-time highs again on the Qs. And notice here on the Qs, we've actually already broken through at least the MACD fast has crossed up through the slow here, and we've broken through the 0.786. So, we're really starting to see some momentum come in here. Notice the last times that this has crossed, we've seen it here, we've seen it here. We did have quite a melt up for some time. And then obviously a pullback, which is healthy. But the point here is it looks like we've gone up quite a bit, which we have. But if you look at the past, there has been continuation on these MACD crosses on the weekly. So that is something to keep in mind as well. IWM is the next one that I want to go over here, and this is the one that kind of convinced me that Friday may not be as bad as people thought. The reason is because look at all the volume above this resistance line shown by the raindrops. You'll see here that, you know, most of the volume at the end of the day was really focused at the top of the range here, all 3 of these days that we crossed through this resistance line. So that is something that I thought was very interesting going into the week ahead. You also have the gap above here, so if we turn on the gap snake, you'll see that this gap really is right around, let's say, the top is around 141. If we turn that on the weekly, you'll see it a little better here, and you'll see that that gap has partially filled. Notice that the gap kind of popped up there because we did try to fill it a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. But now we're possibly going to take another stab at it because we did actually close through this 50% retracement zone. So that is something to keep in mind going into next week. Notice the MACD is also crossing here. The last few times the MACD has crossed like this, we have had continuation up. However, notice that it's not straight up. You're always going to have some, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps forward, 3 steps back type of deal. So it's not always just a straight line up. So that is the cues, something to keep in mind. But the main thing, and XBI honestly is the thing that I look at the most for like kind of risk on. Obviously, coronavirus helps this just because this is a very kind of biotech heavy time in the world because we're searching for a cure, all that news around that, or a vaccine, not a cure, or whatever you want to call it. The thing here is we have this ascending triangle. That's the first thing, and notice that this thing has been tested multiple times, so it's not just one line. It's one data point. I think we've got almost 4 now on here, so we've tested it once, and this is why I like to use 2 lines, because then what I can do is I can take, let's say, this line, draw a parallel line, and all of a sudden now I've got more data points on here, and it's more of a zone rather than just one line. So that is something I like to do all the time, is drawing these parallel zones, because price just doesn't respect one line. It's generally a zone, whether that zone is made up of 2 parallel lines, whether it's made up of something else. But you can see here how well the price respects this zone really since the bottom in mid-March. Going on to the weekly, you'll see here that we are finally breaking out of this longer-term kind of horizontal level. Notice that since 2015, we've been moving up. Once we hit 2018, we kind of just chopped around for 2 years, and now price is finally breaking out of this zone again, which is pretty fascinating to watch. And if we do move on, going into Amazon, you'll see almost something identical here. So it's pretty fascinating to see literally XBI going up from the bottom almost 70% in less than 2 months. That is crazy. It just shows how much money is flowing into research and just biotech in general with all the news out right now with coronavirus. So that is definitely something to keep in mind, the fact that we are breaking out here. Does that mean, technically the market is more risk on now that we're breaking out of these pretty much all-time highs on XBI? If you look back, this has gone on, this uptrend has gone on for some time. And, breaking out of this level is pretty crucial. So this is definitely one to always kind of group together with those broad market ETFs if you're looking at those. VIX is the last kind of broad market thing I want to go over here. And I will need to switch this to something else real quick. All right, so VIX. The VIX is looking interesting. Clearly quite the downtrend here, as you would expect if SPY is continuing to move up. Now the thing here is this thing has really opened up on the channel. Before it was a little tighter. We broke out. Remember here, if we drew this trend line here, we kind of broke out here. Everybody thought, this is the next crash, and then, this area got tested, and we've pulled back ever since. So, until price breaks out of this area, you've got these 2 outer trend lines, this one inner trend line, until this area breaks, I'd say the status quo doesn't really change. I mean, you've got a lot of downside, you've got a little bit of upside here. Until this area is either broken to the upside or the downside, it's kind of just, you know, in its channel. Now, looking at the weekly chart, you'll see that, and I mentioned this as a channel. It's, you know, barely a falling wedge, but you know, a channel generally needs to be parallel. I wouldn't say these are perfectly parallel, but it's pretty damn close. Weekly December 2018 highs have now been the area where VIX actually caught a bid. So notice that we would have never seen this just looking at the daily chart. We would have really had to scroll back. Now, this is why it's always important to throw that weekly on to get the longer term perspective and see that VIX is really catching some type of bid here, not necessarily one that will last. I don't know what's going to happen, but you know, at least last week that was pretty impressive, and then this week tried to do the same and just couldn't do it. So VIX into next week, you know, your guess is good as mine, but I have seen this thing melt during the summer, especially in the 4th of July before. So Disney, we're going to get more into case studies now. Disney is honestly one of my favorite case studies to go over this week. I've been helping out my buddy from college. He's one of my best friends, get in the market, and I haven't been like advising him or anything, but I've just been showing him how to use TrendSpider, showing him the charts, and I got to admit, it was fascinating. He got in Disney down here. We were all in the 120s, the June 19th 120 calls, and I think we initially entered at 135. Those calls went down to 45 cents. My buddy initially was like, oh man, am I just going to sell and take the loss? And I have to admit, the reason we did not sell was because this anchored VWAP held and all of that confluence with this massive block of volume. And so these, my buddy and my other buddy from college that we have a little room that we just chat in, they started adding here, and their average dropped. And this is the beauty of sometimes, you know, hey, if you accidentally fall asleep trading, sometimes it's a good thing. So we ripped, right, on May 15th. I was at the computer, so I sold, and honestly, I had gotten in a little early, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to take, take what I have here and move on to something else because I think we could get a little pullback. Well, I told my buddy, called him, hey, sell us. Well, he didn't answer because he fell asleep, and so he held over the weekend, freaking out, wakes up to Monday morning, and literally was able to sell these things for $350. So the point here is scaling is incredibly important. I was in the biggest position I was willing to get into Disney, and it fell back. So what did I do? I had to deal with the drawdown. Disney went back to 130, area where I bought it. I dollar cost averaged in from like the 115s to the 135, I think. So literally, I sold at break even, and that thing went. I think it hit $5.50 the other day. So my point here is stick to your plan, stick to your rules. If you happen to fall asleep trading, sometimes it's not going to hurt. I've actually had those experiences before too, where if I wouldn't have done anything or if I wasn't at the screen, it would have been better than what I did with my trade. So I thought that was just a cool story to tell you guys about, just because everybody is at a different part of their trading career. It doesn't matter if you're a pro. It doesn't matter if you're a newbie. Everybody can still empathize with each other because everybody goes through these same these same difficulties when trading. Everybody has, I sold too early, or I didn't stick to my plan. So, hopefully these stories help you guys kind of empathize and understand, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody doesn't trade perfectly. Just from a weekly perspective, before I jump into Amazon, you'll see here that the MACD is crossing here. And, that is something to keep in mind, that last time this crossed, you'd think that there was a big continuation up, but look, we crossed here, And then Disney only really continued up for another week or so. So, is this going to be the same? Notice the MACD is in two very different places. MACD is way below zero here. It's above zero here. So there are some differences, but something to keep in mind into next week. Going on to Amazon. This is one of my favorite case studies last week on the Raindrop Charts. So if we turn on the raindrops here, you'll see that last week was crucial not only for the raindrops, but for the anchored volume by price. You'll see here that literally if we anchor the volume by price from March 16th, which was the bottom, we were forming this massive base here. And so you've got this breakout on May 18th through this previous high. And the most important thing here is look at how much volume was above this resistance line. You could see that there was definitely conviction by the buyers. You could then see the next day this huge move up. Still a lot of buyers at the top of the range. You even had buyers at the top of the range here. And then finally, we almost hit the 1.618 fib level here and then reversed. Notice that when we did reverse, you see something opposite. You don't see any buyers at the top of the range. Notice all the volume is at the bottom of the range, actually creating new lows. You can see this because it's a little flat right there. So that means that there was no volume on the left-hand side, i.e. the first half of the day. So we know that volume came in during the second half of the day and created this lower price, and then we had our continuation down the next day. So are raindrops important? Yes, absolutely. They give you a perspective in the market that you're not going to be able to see anywhere else in the stock market as far as on any other platform. I promise you that. And then when we go to the weekly chart, you will see this just absolute continuation from this breakout of this 2-year consolidation zone. Looks kind of similar to XBI, at least from this kind of chop and then break. This looks a little stronger than XBI, at least for now. But just because it's at a higher price or higher level from this breakout zone than XBI was at. But still, it's something to to think about. Is this kind of a longer term breakout? If we go to that monthly chart, clearly this was a massive ascending triangle breakout on the long-term side of things. At least you've got this huge support zone pretty much just straight up, and then you finally got this breakout. So something to consider as well with Amazon, but really just wanted to highlight that case study on the anchored volume by price. So remember, we had that volume base creating. We finally had buyers with conviction. And notice, if we put it right with this anchored volume by price, notice that the raindrop chart, the volume was above this volume block too. So you can actually sometimes use these volume blocks like resistance zones, which is something I've started to do more often after finding some interesting results from it. Going into the next one, which is Tilray. This one absolutely blew up last week. And, why? Well, I can tell you from a supply and demand perspective, there were a lot of people holding in this area. So that means a lot of people were break even right around this zone. So as supply dries up, and remember, this is one of my favorite things about the supply and demand curve. You do not need you do not need more buyers to come in order for the price to go up. You need relative demand to increase, meaning that supply is decreasing relative to your constant demand. But just because the price goes up, you could just have people stop selling. One of the reasons prices drop is because sellers come in and outpace demand. But if sellers stop selling and demand remains constant, you're going to have a move up in price. So regardless of what case that was in this particular case, I think it was a mix of both because you had that weird news about CBD or something in coronavirus last week. This base finally formed, and then you had that demand probably outpacing supply. And then obviously if this news comes out, people stop selling. That decreases the supply, and then you've got these big moves up. So that is Tilray. I did want to go over CRON as well because we were looking at this chart a few weeks ago. I'll admit I got stopped out because, if we're looking at this, I was looking for this zone to hold, and it didn't. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm out. Well, what happens? This was just a massive flush. I mean, no one really could see this area. I mean, maybe it's a fib level. Let's see. Oh, yep, perfect. It barely missed a fib level here, which is probably maybe brought some buyers in. But regardless, this was a really big flush and then just straight up move. But remember, we were talking about the gap, the volume gap above here, and you can see that what happened? The price was able to move very quickly through this area because there was not a lot of friction above. The friction really comes in around 730 to 750, where you've got quite a few people holding from this area here. They bought too early. They had to deal with a drawdown. So when they get back to break even here, this becomes kind of a supply zone for those people who maybe want to get out and just get their money and run. The weekly chart and the monthly chart on CRON are something that are also fascinating. If you look at the volume by price here on the monthly chart, you'll see that, I mean, if we start this from the very beginning of the stock in, what was this month? August 2016, you'll see that all of the volume is holding right here. I mean, look at that. It's kind of fascinating how many shares are holding right at this level. So this creates either one, a volume base, which I think it probably is, or two, notice that all these people are still holding at a loss. I mean, if you look at this volume zone, this is at 755. The price is only at 6.7. So as the price moves up into this area, these people can either break even or they can hold, which would decrease the supply and then increase the price if demand remains constant. So that is something to definitely check out. You've got this channel breaking out here that is just pretty defined. So there's a lot of different things here. If we anchored the Alphatrends VWAP, the anchored VWAP is way up at 1279. So there's just a lot of things to consider for this one, and a pretty cool case study to look at using the anchored volume by price. Going into GE, this one has been a bucking bronco. We have 4 gaps above. We have this monthly chart that has about 4 days left to fill in. Now, if we break down again below 6, this thing's going to be an ugly monthly chart. But, you know, if this thing closed here, that would be an incredibly strong hammer trying to form. And then if we go to the weekly, you'll also see something very interesting as well. If we anchor the volume by price from the start of this downtrend, you'll see most of that volume is still holding way up here around 10 bucks. We also have a gap above around 950. The top of it is at 920 actually. So there's a lot of different things here. If you turn on the RSI, you've got this divergence here as well. Divergence, lower lows on the weekly, higher lows on the RSI here. And you know, on top of that, if we did kind of anchor the volume by price from the top of this previous trend before we reversed, look at how much volume is holding here. That is a massive base forming, and you know, just from previous examples that we've seen since this March bottom, this thing is setting up like a lot of the ones that moved up. Does that mean this is going to do that? No. GE has some weird fundamental underlying you know, risks that a lot of these other companies don't have right now, which is why buyers maybe were a little more easily able to get into your Netflixes of the world and those that actually still have you know, value during the coronavirus. But this, you know, GE got destroyed. A lot of their business was aviation. So that is why the market's been quite resistant to getting in this, at least for the last couple months. It seems the last week we did capitulate. If you look at all of the candles when we generally bottom here on the weekly, notice they try to capitulate at the end of the week. We closed at the low of the week here. We closed at the low of week here before capitulating one more time, probably that Monday or something, before reversing. And then if we go to this candle here, notice we did the same exact thing. Capitulation at the end of the week, and then your reversal. This right here looks a lot to me like this right here. Not exactly, but there are some similarities here that I think are interesting, and that's why I personally am watching it into next week. Remember, we do these videos to highlight TrendSpider and the different features. But, I'm trading, so I'm just mentioning to you guys what I personally am looking at based on some of these features. So please don't take this as advice. Please don't take this as buy or sell signal. There is no advice given here or anything like that. We really want you to understand the product so you can go in and create these charts just like we are, and you can use this platform to help you gain an edge in the market. The last one that I want to go over, just kidding, I have a couple more. Delta looks very similar to this. Delta recently broke out of this descending or falling wedge here. Notice we broke out, pretty much retested resistance. We'll have to see what happens into next week. We do have a massive gap above. Gaps do not have to fill quickly. These can take years to fill, if not ever to fill. But we've got a similar situation as we did in GE. A ton of shares creating a base here. Notice that we did hit these lower lows on the weekly, and then we hit the higher lows on the RSI. So that's something to also keep in mind. Can divergence break down? Absolutely. That's why, divergence is something that you really want to use in confluence with a lot of other things. So, maybe the MACD is crossing or something like that. In this case, the MACD is starting to curl up. The histogram has started to move up. And the histogram moving up is simply just a function of the fast getting closer to the slow. So notice that as we're getting closer here, these are getting smaller. And it's literally a representation of these lines. So you can see this here. As these get closer, this moves up. This area gets smaller. So that's just a demonstration on how to understand the histogram versus that fast versus slow here. So that is Delta, pretty much looking identical to GE. I do want to go over Tesla as well and Chewy, and then we'll be done for this weekend, and you guys can go enjoy Memorial Day weekend. But I did obviously want to mention that we have a couple more stocks to look at before ending the show. But remember, we're always posting charts. Just because we have, what is this, like 12 tickers or something? We're always posting static charts over the weekend. So if you did want to check out some more, we will have more probably tomorrow. We do not have our Sunday podcast tomorrow, so that's why we're going to be posting, extra on the feed, just because we don't have an event this weekend, so everyone can enjoy their holiday weekend. But just wanted to mention that as well. Tesla is one that's a really cool case study on the anchored volume by price. So if you anchor the volume by price from this pretty much the highest close here, notice that we did hit an intraday high on February 4th, but we actually opened and closed higher on February 19th. So that's where I'm going to anchor it from. This is where I'd say the true trend reversed before we had coronavirus crash. And now from this point, you can see that most of the volume is holding right within this zone. We've got two very strong volume shelves here. And you could even see last week, this candle literally bounced right off of this volume bar right here. And so it's fascinating to be able to use these things as an actual area of support and resistance when that bar is on the upside. On the weekly chart, this thing's weird. I mean, if anything, I'd probably turn on the monthly and get a better view of this. So if we do anchor the volume by price from this kind of breakout here on the monthly chart, let me get rid of some of these. And this is something that Brian Shannon taught me with anchoring in general. You want to anchor from these breakout candles. So we really broke out in 2013. And so if we anchor the volume by price here, you could see that there was this huge base forming for the price over the last couple years. We were pretty much in this just really long-term kind of just horizontal channel here. Looks a little bit like Amazon finally broke out. So the monthly looks a lot different from the weekly. So this is why I really like to take a look at those monthly candles into the last few days of the month. Because sure, the monthly candle can change until Friday, but you have a general idea of what the candle looks like pretty much near the month's close. So I have seen candles completely change from something that looks a little bullish to something that's like closing down at 580. So just because this looks like this now does not mean it's going to look like this on Friday. So it's always important to look at those candles when they actually close. But for me personally, I do like to look at them a little before they close just to get an idea of what's going on. The last one that I'm going to go over is Chewy. Chewy was a really cool case study of anchored VWAP and anchored volume by price confluence. So you can see here we had this anchored volume by price and anchored VWAP on March 12th from this bottom. And then you can see since this point in time, the average volume weighted, the average price per share traded, the volume weighted average price since this period is really almost perfect support the last few times we pulled back here. 1, 2, last week was 3, and then look, we have that volume base forming here as well. There was a lot of people holding it break even here. Remember, all we need is either 1, supply to decrease and demand to remain constant for this price to move up, or maybe supply decreases and demand increases. That will also really move you up quickly. So just a huge move in Chewy last week. Congrats to those that were able to jump in that one. And really, this was simply just using the anchored VWAP and the anchored volume by price. There's nothing really too difficult about it. You just need to be able to recognize these capitulation points, these really important areas to anchor from. And then a lot of the time, you'll see the price really respecting these zones. So I know this was a long video. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please remember, we do have the 35% sale going on until May 30th for the Memorial Day sale. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out, hello@trendspider.com. And if you do like this video and want to comment or ask a question below, you can do that as well. Make sure to subscribe if you would like to continue to see these videos. We do them every weekend, and we do have our live stream on Sundays. So there's a lot going on with our channel every week, so make sure to tune in and check it out. Thank you, everyone, so much again. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help you out. Have a great weekend, and happy Memorial Day.